Trudeau has just announced that he is putting tariffs on the U.S. and more specifically, more of the tariffs are going to go on red states. Now, obviously, I live in New York, so I would not be affected by this. But depending on where I go to college, I could be affected based on this. Now, if I go to a state school in New York, I won't be affected by this. If I go to a state school, if I go to the University of Delaware, I won't be affected by this. If I go to the University of Colorado Boulder, I won't be affected by this. If I go to the University at Iowa State, I will be affected by this. And then looking at some schools that, I didn't exactly get into yet, but I could. University of Maryland, I'd be affected by this. University of Washington, I'd be affected by this. I wouldn't be affected by this. Same for the University of Illinois. Same for the, yeah. But then there's the University of Michigan, which I unfortunately got deferred from, but I could still get in. But at Michigan, that line is just so murky. And I don't even know. I'm not doing this on my computer because I need my computer later in case the Northeast Regional Climate Center blog for January 2025 comes out. But in this video, I'm going to be analyzing what I think is a red state and what I think is a blue state, just based on the lines, because purple states are hard, and this is just sort of my interpretation on what I think it could be if you're really going to draw the line somewhere, because you have red states, you have blue states, and then you have purple states, which again could affect me. Not even just University of Michigan, but depending on where I go to a store, University of Delaware, for example, I could be buying lots of stuff from Pennsylvania, which is certainly a swing state, as an example. So it's just tough. Now, there are some states that I think are borderline swing states that I don't qualify as swing states or purple states, but I think could be borderline. Like Minnesota, it's voted Democrat in every election presidentially since 1976. It's the only state to have voted blue in 84. The Minnesota governor is Democrat. The Minnesota, House of Representatives Democrat. The Senate, we don't know what's going to happen since it's currently a 67, 66, maybe the Senate, I don't know. One of the branches is Democrat, and the other one is a 67, 66 advantage in favor of the Republicans, but there's 134 seats, and depending on the result of that special election, that will determine which way it tilts. So I guess it's kind of on the border. Another state that I consider to be like a borderline swing state is New Hampshire. New Hampshire actually has a Republican trifecta, but barely, because Republicans barely control both of the chambers. I'm not sure what the exact margins are. I just know that it didn't flip, and if the 2022 Republicans had a 201 to 199 advantage in the New Hampshire House. So you have a Republican governor, which was maintained. You have a Republican Senate, Republican House. All that stuff was maintained after 2024. So on a statewide level, it appears to be Republican. But then you realize that the last time I voted Republican in a presidential election was 2000. You also realize that New Hampshire has two Democratic senators, and both of the representatives from New Hampshire are Democrats as well. So that really leads you to believe that, maybe New Hampshire is a Democrat state. And I think it is a blue state. I don't think it's a red state. I just mentioned it because it's a statewide trifecta. I'm not going to mention, obviously, blue states like Vermont, which happen to have a Republican governor, and obviously blue states like Maine, which actually happen to somehow still have a Republican senator, even after the rapid polarization in the country. And she might be voted out of office in 2026. I'm not going to mention that. I also think that the final, borderline case that I personally wouldn't count as a swing state, but many would, is the state of North Carolina. I mean, technically you have a Democratic governor in office, but you have a state that hasn't voted Democrat since 2008, 2 Republican senators. It's close, but it always happens to go Republican. And, the one election where it went Democrat in 2008 was the election where Obama won 365 electoral votes. North Carolina might always be close, but it always goes Republican in these things. And the Republicans also control the Congress in North Carolina. So I wouldn't consider that to be a real, true swing state either. And in the election where they were focusing on the core 7 swing states, but I disqualified one of them. So I'm going to sort of lean on more so the core 6 swing states. And then I'm also just going to, go into it, what states I think could be swing states in the future, what states, were swing states that have gotten more solidified recently. Okay. So we're going to go from west to east, and of these 6 swing states, I mean, I know I've been to 37 states in the country. I've been to all 6 of them. All 6 of these core swing states I've been to. Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. At some point or another, I've been to all 6 states. Anyway, going on to Nevada. Nevada is an interesting state because I thought that Nevada was a blue state. A pretty solid blue state. Because, again, it might have always been close, but everything always went to the Democrats. Like, everything always went to the Democrats. But then a few things happened. 2020, the state got slightly more Republican, despite the nation as a whole shifting 2% to the left. Nevada stayed pretty much the same. I think it shifted 0.03% to the Republicans. Obviously, Biden still won the state, but it began to mark a shift in Nevada. 2022, Democrats barely keep the Senate seat, and while they keep both chambers of Congress, so they keep both the Senate and the House, they lose the governorship in Nevada to the Republicans. And in 2024, for the first time since 2004, the state of Nevada votes Republican. So Nevada also voted voted red in the election. So Nevada is as clear cut of a purple state as it can be, and it really just became such a purple state as you finally have Hispanics and Latinos in Las Vegas that are starting to become more split. After they voted Democrat in a block for a while, they're now starting to become more split. So that's why you're seeing Nevada becoming one of those states that is turning much bluer, much more purple. But, and sorry about this, as you could maybe kind of tell, it's snowing. So that means it's cold. It's like 32 degrees. I mean, nothing's sticking right now. I don't know if it's going to, but it's cold. So I would still say that Nevada should be classified as a blue state for these purposes. I mean, yes, they voted for Trump, but if you use that as a metric, then number one, every single purple state goes against you. And Nevada still has a lot more Democrat than Republican representing the state. So I would personally argue that Nevada should be a blue state. Whereas Arizona, on the other hand, Arizona was weird because it was one of the purple states that that everyone knew was just becoming a lot more purple. It wasn't like a surprise where all of a sudden like Georgia, where in one election it's like, okay, what the hell happened? 2018, the Senate seat in Arizona flips to Democrat. In 2020, the other seat flips Democrat because it was a special election, which the Democrats maintained in 2022. 2020, the state also narrowly votes, for the first time since 96, narrowly votes Republican as Biden wins the state by 0.31%. But Republicans maintained a trifecta. 2022, Republicans maintain a Senate and a House in Arizona by very slim margins, but lose the governorship. So Arizona, and then it obviously went back to voting red in 2024, and other swing states, it was the one that voted red by the largest margins, like 5% is what it voted red for. I mean, I'm not too familiar with all the margins of all the states because, you know, and maybe I should have gotten more into it, but I don't know, I was kind of burnt out by the election, to be honest, and Jackson's U didn't update it, and that's how I got so familiar with it. So, I mean, I'll go back and look at the margins at some point, maybe, but I do know Arizona was the only one to vote Republican by more than 5% of all the swing states. For those reasons, even with 2 Democratic senators, I'd still classify Arizona as a red state. All right, next up, Michigan. I mean, no, not Michigan, Wisconsin. Wisconsin is west of Michigan. Wisconsin is an odd one. So, they, both the Republican and Democrat, in 2022 and 2024 respectively, in the Senate maintained their election by less than 1%. And I think the presidential election, I think Wisconsin was the one state where it voted red by less than 1%. So everything is always close in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I believe, has, I don't remember. I think that they have a Democratic governor. I think both chambers of the Wisconsin Congress are controlled by Republicans, if I remember correctly. And it was a weird state because 2016 is the first time since '84 that Wisconsin votes for the Republicans. In 2020 it goes back to Democrat, but then in 2024 it goes back to Republican. All the while, every election is less than 1%. I think Wisconsin might be the most purple of purple states, but I'd still lean it towards red for these purposes just because it voted for Trump and you have to really just be on that angle. If it's a tie, it goes red. Michigan has 2 Democratic senators in their Congress, represent the U.S. in Congress. Michigan actually in 2022 maintained a Democratic governor and both chambers flipped blue, so thus the Democrats in Minnesota gained a trifecta. However, in 2022, I don't remember if it was the Michigan House or the Michigan Senate. I'm pretty sure one of them flipped back red. Even though it was another one of those Biden-Trump states, I still think that Michigan is one of those states that I would personally say is still more blue than red, whereas Pennsylvania is very interesting because in 2022 the Senate seat in Pennsylvania flipped blue, but that was because the incumbent retired to return to the private sector. In 2024, the Democrat lost re-election to the Pennsylvania Senate, and it flipped to the Republicans. Pennsylvania, I believe, is one of these where I think it has a split Congress and a Democratic governor. I think that it definitely has a Democratic governor. I think it has a split Congress, but I'm not sure if I think it's a Republican Senate and a Democratic House. So Pennsylvania is a very weird state in terms of political demographics. But I certainly saw a rightward shift in Pennsylvania, so I think it goes on the red side. Finally, Georgia, 2016, in even 2018, everything looks normal, though it's a bit close. But again, governorships aren't always the best metric for this, although they usually are pretty reliable. 2020, everything changes. Democrats win Georgia for the first time since '92 by 0.24%, and both of the runoffs in Georgia are won by Democrats. This is how Democrats get control of Congress for 2020, and you see both Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock win their elections on runoffs, both defeating the incumbents. 2022, Warnock maintains his re-election, but Georgia maintains its Republican trifecta, and the governor keeps his re-election. And now voted for Trump. So now it's a weird state where you have a Republican trifecta, 2 Democratic senators. But the difference from New Hampshire is that it voted for Trump by quite a few percentage points, whereas New Hampshire still voted for Biden by more than 5%. I think like 10, 7, somewhere in that range. So that's where I think that it's headed politically. That's why I think it's headed politically. I think that I think it is more of a red state, because I think that the two elections where we saw Democrats have a footing, 2020, 2022, were both elections that were more favorable to them. And I will say, Jon Ossoff, aside from Susan Collins, is probably the most vulnerable Republican, the most vulnerable senator, and definitely the most vulnerable Democrat up for re-election in the 2026 cycle. I would not be surprised if Jon Ossoff loses his seat. Raphael Warnock, I think, is also a bit of a better senator than Jon Ossoff. Now, as for, just how much swing states have diversified, if you had told someone back in 2010 that, the core swing states would be Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and I guess to an extent North Carolina, they'd laugh in your face. Now, obviously, even though Obama won Indiana in 2008, nobody took Indiana seriously as a swing state. Like, I truly mean it, nobody took them seriously as a swing state. But back then, safe Republican states like Iowa, Ohio, and Florida were considered to be bellwether states for the most part, especially Florida and Ohio. And people really saw Florida and Ohio as swing states. Iowa and Ohio, I think it became sort of obvious after 2016 when they both voted for Trump by 8% that it wasn't going to be the case. And sure enough, both states did wind up flipping to the Republicans in 2020. So obviously broke their streaks. Florida too, but Florida, even though it was shifting right, it was still like 3.5%. And I think there were still signs of being a swing state. Like, everything in Florida was controlled by Republicans, but both the governorship and Senate was determined by less than 0.5%. In Ohio and Iowa, it was a lot more convincing. Now, Ohio actually maintained their Democratic senator in 2018, unlike Florida, but they got ousted in 2024, which will remain the last bastion of Democrats in the state of Ohio. And Florida then voted Republican by 13.1%. I get that Trump is a Floridian, so this makes sense, but I think it really makes obvious just how much of a safe Republican state Florida has now become. And I think that those states have taken huge shifts to the right. But back in 10 years ago-ish, they were swing states. 2012, they all vote Democrat. And same for 2008. So, in 2008, they all voted Democrat relatively convincingly. Obviously, they all voted Republican in 2004, but you see the struggle there. They were definitely seen as swing states for a while. On the other end, Colorado and to an extent New Mexico have turned a lot bluer. I guess you could also throw New Hampshire in this category, because New Hampshire did vote Republican in 2000, but then Democrat in 2004. The Republicans lost the Senate seats in 2008 and 2016 respectively, and even though they maintain a Republican government, again, on a national level, they've been consistently Democrat ever since 2016. At the very least, since 2010 was the last time someone won a Senate race in New Hampshire, and that was in a red wave. But more so, Colorado and New Mexico are states where, New Mexico did vote Republican in 2004, same for Colorado, and was close in 2000. But then, Colorado was a tipping point state in 2008 and 2012. And, you had that happening. But even in those cases, it was still voted Democrat by a pretty safe margin. Just that Obama crushed it both times. And in terms of the, 2016, when these states barely go back towards Trump, when Colorado's still like 5% Democrat in terms of margin, and New Mexico is even more significant than that. It's even more bluer. like it became obvious at that point that that these states were, Democrats. Both states have also gotten Democratic trifectas since, Colorado, New Mexico. They both voted Democrat by like double digits in 2020. And I don't know how much red to the right they shifted in 2024. In 2020, the Colorado Senate seat, the Republican incumbent who was elected in 2014, lost their seat. But not only did they lost it, he lost it by like 9%. So for an incumbent, that's really bad. I think that those are two states that shifted the other direction. Conversely, some of our new swing states, like Nevada was always kind of purple. It was always seen as kind of purple. Pennsylvania, it's tough because in 2008, they voted Democrat by double digits. But then again, that wasn't that far from the tipping point. Colorado was voted Democrat by 9%. So, you can make that argument there. And then 2012, it voted for Obama by 5.4%, which is the same margin as Colorado. So you could see Pennsylvania turning blue. You obviously had that whole Senate controversy involving the Republicans and, with that senator who switched affiliations in 2009 to give the Democrats a filibuster-proof majority, only for him to lose in a primary and then a seat flips in 2010. The Republican governor and all that stuff. So Pennsylvania is very confusing. I think people saw it as kind of a swing state, but at the very least a Democratic-leaning swing state, into now where it is as a core swing state. I think that, Michigan and Wisconsin, though, in 2008, they both voted for Obama by a lot more. Wisconsin around 13%, Michigan around 16%. So those are both seen as solid blue states. Like, they were all part of the blue wall, but Pennsylvania is seen the most likely to break out of the blue wall since it was, turning bluer. I mean, Wisconsin, I get that Republicans had some success with the Senate and all that stuff, but still, and with the governorships too, but still, I didn't actually think it was going, no one actually would have thought that it would have flipped red by 2016, and especially not Michigan, after how much Democrats really killed it in the Michigan elections in 2008, and the fact they still have not had a Democratic senator since like 2000, which was only 2 years after New York ousted their Republican senator. Now, as for, Georgia and Arizona, they were both seen as pretty reliable Republican states, maybe not totally reliable Republican states, but ones that, Republicans have won pretty convincingly. But in 2016, the margin of Trump now is up significantly from like 7% Republican down to like 4%. And then 2020, they flip, but then 2024, they all go back. And it's just a complicated mess in these two states. These are two states that were seen as pretty reliable Republican states into now turning into swing states. North Carolina also sort of always hovered as a swing state, but one that was always a Republican-leaning swing state. And this sort of foreshadows what we could see in the future regarding swing states. Like, as an example, could Alaska be becoming a swing state? I highly doubt it after Republicans won the state by 15%, but it was only 10% back in 2024. Obviously, the last time the in 2020, obviously 1964 is the last time the Democrats carried the state of Alaska. But in 2022, in the House special election, that House seat flipped to Democrats. Granted, Republicans took it back in 2024, but it was Democrat for over 2 years. And, looking at Senate, it voted Democrat in 2008. Granted, in 2014, they flipped it right back. But Alaska's an interesting state. Party control of they have a Republican governor, but they always have these coalitions in the state government, so it's hard to always tell, which side actually has control in the Alaska government, but Alaska is a state that I think could, if the right conditions are met, become a swing state. Alaska is also another weird state because the urban areas vote Republican, whereas the rural areas vote Democrat, whereas in most of the U.S. it's the exact opposite. I guess in Alaska it sort of makes sense based on the fact that a lot of these more remote areas are more Native Americans who are more inclined to vote Democrat. But it is something that always just struck odd, is how, usually in these state maps you see there's a lot more Republican than what the states actually are. How come Alaska is this weird one where everything is inverted? Texas. Trump only won it by 6% in 2020. Granted, this time he won it by like 9%, and Cruz's margin of victory went from like 3% to 9%. Actually, I think Trump won by 13%. But still, Texas is an interesting conversation because if Florida isn't truly done as a swing state, could Texas be turning blue? People are thinking Texas could turn blue after 2022. They looked vulnerable. I mean, granted, everything in Texas is still overwhelmingly Republican, but it's turning blue because the same Sun Belt transitions that flipped Georgia and Arizona to swing states and also made North Carolina a bit more purple, they're spreading to Texas too. And it's one of those states where if you put measures to restrict voters, Republicans will keep it, but Democrats could easily overpower them. And I mean, maybe not easily, but I could see Texas being a state that could become a swing state. Not saying it will, just saying that Texas, you got to keep an eye on it. Because I think that in 10 years from now, people are going to be, you might say, well, how was Texas, a swing state? But 2032, that might be the reality. Texas might be a swing state. And that would be absolutely devastating to Republicans if Texas went Democrat. Again, Alaska, I just threw it as a hypothetical. Texas, I think, could actually happen. Coming on the other side, could Virginia go back to being blue? I think Virginia actually was Republican in 2004. And I don't understand in hindsight why I didn't mention it as one of the states that was turning blue. Since 2008 and 2012, it voted more Republican than the national average, even though it voted Democrat in both years. Before 2016, it shifts towards Clinton significantly. 2020, it appears out of reach, and in 2024, it goes back to 5% in favor of the Democrats, after it was 10%. Obviously, in terms of everything involving Virginia, I'm pretty sure that Virginia has a Democratic House and Senate. I know there's a Democratic Senate. I think the House, after it flipped red in 2021, went back to being blue in 2023. But I think that, but Virginia still has a Republican governor. But both senators in Virginia are Democratic. So Virginia is another one of those weird states that, you could see as potentially being in the conversation of, is it becoming a swing state again? I don't personally think it is, but you never know. New Jersey also hasn't voted Republican since either 88 or 84. But again, 5% margin of victory, so you always have to be careful there. And Phil Murphy nearly lost a seat in 2021. If he doesn't run in 2025, that governor race is sure going to be competitive. So, New Jersey, again, 2 Democratic senators who won convincingly. But, again, you got to keep an eye on New Jersey because that is a state that could be turning into a swing state just based on recent trends. So, in conclusion, I think that when you have a swing state and have to determine it as Republican or Democrat, you got to analyze several factors about the political composition of that state. Because obviously, some states have factors that make it more Republican and more Democrat. Again, I'm not using this as a guide for what Trudeau should do. I'm just sort of debating how do you classify a swing state as Republican or Democrat for these purposes. I don't exactly like that Trudeau's being in specific. I actually don't like Trudeau in general. And this is one of those weird things that I think could have implications for the U.S. that are both positive and negative. I think that this really could be something that could help the U.S. or hurt it.